When I was a little girl, I attended a church in my neighborhood. The church wasn't large, and the building wasn't particularly impressive, but there was something special about it: the music, the soft prayers, and the sense of community that made me feel at peace. I enjoyed going there every Sunday, listening to the pastor and feeling surrounded by warmth. The pastor, at first, seemed like a kind, approachable man. He had a gentle voice and a way of making everyone feel important. He would speak to the congregation with passion and a deep belief in the goodness of the church, and I admired him for that. But as time passed, I began to feel uneasy, though I didn't understand why. It was subtle at first. He always seemed to notice me in particular, and although I was just a child, some moments made me feel uncomfortable in his presence. I couldn't put my finger on it. I just felt like something was wrong, though I couldn't explain it. One Sunday, after the service had ended, my parents were chatting with some friends outside the church. I was waiting for them when the pastor came over and asked if he could speak with me for a moment. He mentioned that it would just be a quick conversation, and though I had no reason to doubt him, something in my gut made me uneasy. But being young and trusting, I agreed. The pastor led me into a small room near the back of the church. It was a tight, cramped space with little room to move around. The light was dim, and the atmosphere was far less inviting than the rest of the church. We sat down, and he began to ask me about school. He wanted to know if I was making friends and how things were going. I told him that I was fine and that I had a lot of friends. We talked about school and life for a few minutes, and for a moment, it seemed like a normal conversation. But then something shifted. The conversation began to feel strange. The pastor moved closer to me, and at first, I didn't know why, but then he made me feel increasingly uncomfortable. He spoke in a way that seemed overly familiar, and I began to feel trapped in the small room. My instincts told me that this wasn't right, but I didn't know how to express what I was feeling. All I could do was remain silent, trying to make sense of the situation. Eventually, the pastor told me I could leave. He acted as if nothing had happened. I walked out of the room feeling confused and unsettled. I saw my parents standing outside the church waiting for me. They noticed my expression and asked if everything was okay. I didn't know how to answer. I simply shrugged, unsure of how to explain the strange feelings I had inside. My parents seemed concerned, but not overly alarmed, and we went home together. The weeks that followed were filled with the same feelings of unease whenever I went to church. I continued to attend, but I began to notice the pastor acting strangely toward me, making me feel uncomfortable every time we interacted. He no longer spoke to me directly, but his presence lingered, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, yet I was too young to fully understand why I felt that way. Years passed, and as I got older, I began to understand the implications of what had happened to me. In middle school, I learned about personal boundaries and sexual harassment during a health class, and for the first time, I began to understand that the pastor's behavior had been inappropriate. That was the moment I realized that what I had experienced was more than just a misunderstanding or a misplaced kindness. It was something far worse, something I didn't know how to describe back then. When I understood what had happened, I knew I had to tell my parents. It took me some time to gather the courage to speak up, but one evening, I sat down with them and explained everything that had occurred. I told them about the pastor's actions and how they made me feel. They were shocked, angry, and upset, but they also felt a deep sadness. My father asked me why I hadn't told him sooner. I explained that I didn't understand the severity of it at the time. I was just a child and didn't have the words to express what I was going through. My parents were supportive, but also felt a sense of guilt that they hadn't noticed the warning signs earlier. We decided to take action, and a few days later, we approached the landlord of the church. I told him about what had happened, and though I feared he might not believe me, to my surprise, he listened and took my story seriously. He believed me. That moment of validation was both a relief and a burden lifted off my shoulders. About a week later, we received an email from the landlord informing us that the pastor had been evicted from the church. He was no longer allowed to continue his work there. My parents and I felt a strange sense of relief, though it was mixed with sadness and anger. We didn't know what had happened to the pastor, but we hoped that the action taken would prevent him from causing harm to anyone else. I never returned to that church. The thought of stepping foot inside again was too painful, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the pastor's actions might have affected others in ways I couldn't imagine. When I returned to London after a business trip to New York, I couldn't stop thinking about Tom, the overly friendly neighbor in the shared airbnb. I had booked a cheap room for a week due to budget cuts at work. The place was small but clean enough, located in Queens and close to public transport. The reviews weren't great, but nothing raised alarm bells. The building had cracked steps, graffiti on the walls, and the faint smell of dampness. My room was basic, just a bed, desk, and closet, but it felt cozy. There was a shared kitchen and bathroom down the hall. On my first evening, and packing my suitcase, there was a knock on the door. A man in his early 40s stood there with a wide smile. He had slightly messy hair and kind eyes. "Hey there, I'm Tom," he said. "I live next door." Eager to chat, he offered tips on where to eat, warned me about shady neighborhoods, and even suggested a few tourist spots to visit if I had free time. At first, I appreciated his help. Traveling alone in a foreign city can feel isolating, so having someone to talk to was comforting. But soon, his friendliness started to feel overbearing. He asked a lot of questions. Where did I work? What was I doing in New York? How long would I be staying? Even how much I paid for the airbnb. I gave vague answers, not wanting to seem rude, but I couldn't shake the feeling that his curiosity wasn't entirely innocent. One evening, I returned from a late meeting to find him waiting outside my door. He held out a steaming cup of coffee. "Thought you could use this," he said with a grin. I thanked him, though I found it strange that he knew exactly when I'd be back. It was almost as if he had been watching for me. That night, I locked my door and double-checked the windows. The city's usual noises, sirens, car horns, distant chatter, felt louder than usual. I couldn't sleep, replaying every interaction with Tom in my mind. The next morning, I noticed something odd. My laptop, which I always kept in my bag, was now sitting on the desk. I was sure I hadn't left it there. Had I been careless? Or had someone been in my room while I was out? I checked my bag, wallet, and passport were still there, but unease lingered. Tom knocked again that day, but I pretended not to be home. Through the peephole, I watched him stand there for a moment before walking away. That night, while working on my laptop, I noticed the Wi-Fi was sluggish. When I checked the network settings, I saw an unfamiliar device connected labeled Tom's phone. My chest tightened. Why was he using my Wi-Fi? The following day, I decided to confront him casually in the kitchen. I returned from dinner to find my room's door slightly ajar. My heart pounded as I pushed it open. My bag was unzipped. My belongings were scattered. The only thing missing was my watch, a cheap one, but it had sentimental value. I rushed to Tom's door and knocked, but no answer. Should I call the police? Would they even care about a missing watch? I spent that night awake, back against the door, clutching a kitchen knife I had taken from the shared space. Every sound outside made me flinch. The next morning, I saw Tom in the hallway. He greeted me with his usual cheerful demeanor as if nothing had happened. I wanted to scream at him, but instead I forced a tight smile and locked myself in my room. I decided then to check the urban reviews again, this time more carefully. And that's when I noticed a pattern I hadn't before. Multiple guests had mentioned a nosy neighbor who made them feel uncomfortable. Some even reported missing items, but nothing had been done about it. Frustrated and scared, I contacted the urban host, but they didn't seem concerned. I called the police. I'll never forget the time when I almost lost my life in 2022. It was in September, and I lived in Onalaska, Wisconsin. I was also a sophomore in high school. I met a 17-year-old man named Austin at my summer job. He used to go to the same high school as me, but he got expelled for plagiarism. He would pick me up and drop me off at home every day of the summer when we had work, because I didn't have a license at the time. I also want to point out that it was pretty obvious that he had a crush on me, because he would hug me every day. But I made it look like he didn't know that I knew that he liked me, and it worked. I didn't feel the same way as he did. We were now into like the second or third week of school, and I was still settling in, because I still had summer blues. It was the end of the night, and me and Austin were driving home from a party that a kid from school threw. Austin now just pulled up at my house to drop me off. Before I could step out of the vehicle, Austin hesitantly asked me if I wanted to go out with him. I laughed and told him that I was okay, and I just wanted to be friends. He then said right with a frown on his face. We then waved and said bye to each other. I then went inside my house, took off my shoes, changed into my pajamas, brushed my teeth, and was ready to go to bed. Before I could even go to bed, I got a text from a friend. I unlocked my phone, and what I read on my screen will forever haunt me in my dreams. It was a long paragraph about how Austin had been secretly taking photos of me while I was sleeping in my bed through my window. I would sometimes leave the shades to my window open because no moonlight or street lights ever came through the window. I also saw the photos of me sleeping. The reason how my friend found out is because Austin bragged to her about this through text. He also had a photo album of it that was labeled the love of my life. Right there and then I felt like a needle was going through my heart, realizing his obsession with me. I sent him a text in all caps telling him to never contact me again. He then said he was sorry for playing the victim card. I felt like screaming after reading his text. I sent him another text saying to him that he needed to lose my number, and next thing I know, I blocked him. I wasn't feeling tired now, so I went to take some melatonin and Benadryl so I could fall asleep quicker, and it worked, but not for long. I don't know what time it was, but I woke up to the sound of my window shattering. I couldn't react quickly, and right in front of me, there he was, Austin. Before I could see what was in his hand, I felt my face being stabbed with a knife. I started to cry and scream, and about 5 seconds later, I heard my dad scream out in the hallway, "What the hell is going on?" That's when Austin managed to escape through the broken window. Next, my father came storming into my room, and he had a look of terror on his face. He was feeling a mixture of sadness and anger, and he started hugging me, asking if I was all right and what had just happened. I was honest with him and told him that I wasn't fine or safe, and that boy Austin had broken through my window and started attacking me with a knife. Now my father's emotion turned to 100% anger, and he ran out of the house chasing down Austin, but he was unable to find him. I called the police and told them my story, and they said they'd be there ASAP. They arrived 10 minutes later, along with medics. I was now feeling very dizzy with blood all over my face. My father gave me some water and a towel to wrap around my body. I was able to tell them my side of the story, and I was then taken to the hospital in the ambulance while the police would try to locate where Austin was. I was treated for my stab wounds, and I stayed overnight at the hospital and was able to go home the next day. It took the cops a little while to find him, but they eventually found him. I was given information that when Austin was at the hospital, he stated that he was going to prison for a long time, admitted that he didn't know why he did it, and expressed that he loved me. As a result, Austin was charged with felony counts with attempted first-degree intentional homicide and rape burglary, and was subsequently given a cash bond at $50,000. A year later, he was guilty of the first charge, but the second charge was dismissed. But regardless, Austin was sentenced to 16 years in Wisconsin State Prison and 4 years of extended supervision. Although justice has been served, I still get very skittish whenever I meet another man because I'm afraid of what his real intentions are. I know I sound crazy, but I still have a lot of PTSD from it. I wish nothing but pity on Austin, and I hope he goes to hell when he dies. Vacations are supposed to be relaxing, right? That's what my wife Melody and I thought when we decided to spend a week in Italy. We had saved up for months, dreaming of the cobblestone streets, warm Mediterranean breeze, and plates of pasta bigger than our heads. The trip was everything we hoped for, but when we came back home, something felt off. It started small at first. We thought we were just imagining things. The books on the shelf weren't in the order we left them. A mug we'd bought in Rome had moved from the counter to the dining table. I joked that maybe our house had missed us and decided to entertain itself while we were away. Melody laughed, but I could tell she didn't think it was funny. We tried to brush it off, telling ourselves it was nothing. Maybe we'd moved the mug and forgotten. Maybe the books had shifted on their own. Still, the feeling that something wasn't quite right clung to the air like a bad smell. A few days later, I was working a night shift. My office was just a 20-minute drive from our house, and it was a quiet night. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. It was Melody. "Hey, everything okay?" I asked. But what came through wasn't a calm voice. It was the sound of her breathing fast and shallow, like she was trying not to panic. "I think someone's in the house," she whispered, her voice trembling. My heart sank. What? "Melody, stay on the line." Before she could say anything more, the call cut off. I didn't think. I grabbed my car keys, bolted out of the office, and drove like a madman. The streets blurred past me, and all I could think about was Melody. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark. The porch light was off, though I was sure we'd left it on when I left for work. I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking as I unlocked the door. The living room was eerily silent. "Melody," I called, my voice echoing through the house. No answer. I moved through the house, flipping on lights as I went. The kitchen was empty. The dining room too. Then I saw her. Melody was lying on the floor in the hallway, unconscious. Blood was dripping from a gash on her forehead. My stomach turned. "Melody," I dropped to my knees, gently shaking her. Her eyelids fluttered and she let out a groan. Relief washed over me as her eyes slowly opened. "What happened?" I asked her, trying to keep my voice calm. Melody winced, sitting up with my help. She reached up to touch her forehead, her fingers coming away red with blood. "I was going to the kitchen," she said, her voice weak. I heard footsteps behind me. I thought it was you, but before I could turn around, someone hit me. My blood ran cold. "Did you see who it was?" She shook her head. "No, I didn't even get the chance to look." After making sure Melody was okay, I called the police. They arrived quickly, 2 officers searching the house while another took our statements. "No sign of forced entry," one of the officers said. "Are you sure someone was here?" I felt a flash of anger. Of course we were sure. My wife had been attacked in her own home. But I bit my tongue. "They must have had a key, or known how to get in," I said. The officer nodded, making notes in his little book. "We'll do a full sweep, but you might want to stay somewhere else for a few days." Melody and I ended up spending the night at a nearby hotel. Neither of us slept much. The police did find anyone, whoever it was had vanished into the night. They told us to change our locks and install a security system, but their words did little to ease my mind. Over the next few weeks, we tried to move on, but the feeling of unease never went away. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows made us jump. Melody stopped sleeping in the house when I worked late, choosing instead to stay with her sister. I couldn't blame her. Then one evening I found something that made my stomach churn all over again. While cleaning up the guest bedroom, I noticed the closet door was slightly open. Inside, shoved into the back corner, was a baseball bat. It wasn't ours. The sight of it made my hands tremble. Was this the weapon the intruder had used? Had they hidden it here on purpose? Or worse, had they been living in our house without us knowing? I called the police again and they took the bat for testing. I never found out if they got any fingerprints from it. Months have passed now, and we've taken every precaution we can, but no matter what we do, that feeling of being watched never truly goes away. Thanksgiving used to feel like home, with the smell of roasted turkey, Sam's goofy jokes, and the warmth of family around the table. It was always something I looked forward to. After 2019, though, the day became quieter and lonelier. That was the year Sam passed away in a car accident. He was only 14. The image of him in the hospital bed, the machines beeping slower and slower, still haunts me. By 2021, my parents and I were just going through the motions. We tried to make it normal that year. We invited my Uncle Joe and Aunt Linda over to help fill the emptiness. The house, tucked near the woods, felt both cozy and isolated, a place where silence could stretch for miles. The evening passed as usual, too much food, a little too much beer, and small talk that worked hard to avoid the topic of Sam. It hurt more than the memories themselves. By the time everyone went to bed, the house was steeped in that deep, still quiet you only find in the countryside. That's when the knocking started. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep hadn't come easily for me in years, especially on nights like these. My room was just down the hall from where Sam's had been. Sometimes I'd catch myself glancing at his closed door, half expecting to hear his voice on the other side. The first knock was faint, so soft I thought I imagined it. Just 3 quick raps. I held my breath, listening. The second set came louder, firmer. It wasn't the wind or an animal. Someone was at the front door. My phone sat on the nightstand, but I didn't reach for it. Something about those knocks froze me in place, like if I moved, I'd draw attention to myself. I strained my ears, hoping to hear someone else in the house stirring. Nothing. Everyone must have heard it, how could they not? The knocking continued, always 3. It wasn't frantic or desperate, just steady. I stayed in bed, rigid with unease. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might drown out the noise. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the knocking stopped. I waited a long time before I even dared to exhale. Minutes passed in silence, and eventually I must have fallen asleep, because I woke up to daylight streaming through the curtains. When I went downstairs the next morning, my parents and Uncle Joe were already up, standing by the front door, and Linda was still sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee she wasn't drinking. "Did you hear that knocking last night?" my dad asked. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, around 3. Exactly 3. He confirmed. My mom looked pale, her eyes darting nervously between us. "No one checked. Whoever it was, if it was anyone, they didn't stick around," Uncle Joe said firmly. "There's nothing out there now, but there was something." When I opened the door to step outside, I almost tripped over it, the single white sneaker, damp with frost. I stared at it for a long moment before I realized why it looked so familiar. It was Sam's. His favorite sneakers. The same ones he'd been wearing the day of the accident. I remembered the scuff on the side from when he tried to learn to skateboard, and the faded lettering on the heel. "How is this here?" I whispered, barely able to form the words. My mom's hand flew to her mouth. She backed away, shaking her head, as though refusing to believe what she was seeing. My dad bent down, but he didn't touch the shoe. None of us did. "We need to check the cameras," he said finally, his voice low. The security footage from that night, my dad fast-forwarded until we hit 3 o'clock a.m. sharp. And there it was, a front porch illuminated by the weak glow of the light above the door. And Sam, he walked into the frame like he just stepped out of the woods. He looked exactly like he had the day he died, same jeans, same hoodie, same sneakers. His face was pale, almost washed out by the camera's grainy resolution, but it was unmistakably him. He approached the door slowly and raised a hand. That's when the knocking began. We could see his knuckles rapping against the wood perfectly in time with what we'd all heard. I felt cold all over even though the house was warm. For a while, Sam just stood there, knocking. Then something changed. He turned sharply, his head snapping toward the direction of the woods. He looked terrified. Without warning, he bolted. Sam ran back into the shadows as if something was chasing him, though the footage showed nothing. He was gone in seconds. But as he fled, his shoe slipped off and landed on the porch. He didn't stop to retrieve it. The camera recorded several more hours of nothing after that. No one spoke after we watched the footage. My dad quietly closed the laptop. And my mom excused herself to her room. Uncle Joe muttered something about getting firewood, but didn't come back for over an hour. The shoe stayed on the porch all day. No one wanted to touch it, and none of us dared to throw it away. By nightfall, my dad finally picked it up and placed it in a box in the attic. He didn't say a word while he did it. We never talked about that night again, not directly. Sometimes, though, I catch my parents glancing at the attic door, like they were worried the box might not stay shut. And every Thanksgiving since, I find myself awake at 3 o'clock a.m. staring at the ceiling, listening. I haven't heard the knocking again. When my wife Catherine passed away, my world shattered. I was left alone to care for our 3-year-old daughter Alina. She was my little princess, the only light left in my life. But grief doesn't pause life, and I had a business to run. I knew I couldn't do it all, so I decided to hire a babysitter to look after her during the day. I was careful in choosing someone, interviews, background checks, references. I went through it all. That's how I found James. He was young, polite, and had experience working with kids. Alina seemed to like him right away, which eased my worries. I thought I had made the right choice. One evening, about 2 months after James started, I worked late. It wasn't unusual, sometimes deadlines piled up. By the time I drove home, it was almost midnight. As I pulled into the driveway, something felt off. James's car wasn't there. At first, I thought maybe he had taken Alina to a late-night outing, but that didn't make sense. Why would he take her out so late? My stomach began to knot as I stepped out of the car. The house was dark, no lights in the windows, no sound from inside. I unlocked the door and rushed in, calling James. Alina, no answer. I searched every room, upstairs, downstairs, the backyard. I looked everywhere. The house was completely empty. Alina's toys were scattered across the living room like she'd been playing. But there was no sign of her. I tried calling James, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Panic clawed at my chest. Where were they? I called the police. My hands were shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to dial the number. When they answered, I could barely get the words out. My daughter, she's gone. The babysitter, he's gone too. The dispatcher assured me help was on the way. Within minutes, officers arrived. They asked me dozens of questions. What time did I leave work? When did I last see James? Did he say anything unusual? I told them everything, though my mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. We'll find them, one of the officers promised. We'll issue an Amber Alert for your daughter. Those words gave me a sliver of hope, but the night dragged on. With each passing hour, the knot in my stomach tightened. Where was my little girl? 3 agonizing days later, the police called. They had found James. Relief flooded me finally. I get answers. But my heart sank when they said, "We don't have your daughter." I went to the station immediately. They had James in custody. But he refused to meet my eyes. He looked different, as shifty, nervous. "Where is she?" I demanded. "What did you do to my daughter?" The officer stepped between us. "He claims he sold her." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at James, disbelief and rage boiling inside me. "You sold her? She's a child. What kind of monster are you?" James muttered something, but I couldn't hear him over the blood pounding in my ears. The officer explained that James had sold Alina for $10,000 to someone living in a remote cabin in the forests of Alaska. "Who is this person?" I asked, my voice trembling. "How do we get her back?" The police assured me they were already working on it. They had a lead on the cabin and were coordinating with local authorities in Alaska. But the process was slow. Every moment that passed felt like a lifetime. The wait was unbearable. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. All I could think about was Alina. Was she scared? Was she crying for me? The thought of her in the hands of some stranger tore me apart. After 2 more days, the police finally had news. They had found the cabin deep in the woods, nearly an hour from the nearest town. It belonged to an elderly woman who lived there alone. When the officers entered the cabin, they found signs of a child, small clothes, and a toy bear that looked just like one Alina had. My heart raced as they described what they found in the basement of a locked room with no windows, and inside my daughter. I flew to Alaska as soon as I could. Seeing Alina again was the most emotional moment of my life. She was scared and confused, but physically unharmed. I hugged her tightly, promising never to let her go again. The woman who took her, however, was a different story. The police arrested her on the spot. She claimed she had bought Alina to raise as her own, as if that excused her actions. Her cabin was filled with strange things: old dolls, locks of hair, jars, and photos of children. It sent chills through me to think about what could have happened if the police hadn't found her in time. Alina doesn't talk much about what happened in that cabin. I don't push her to. She's slowly adjusting, but the spark in her eyes isn't as bright as it once was. I've enrolled her in therapy, hoping it will help her heal. As for me, I can't stop blaming myself. I was the one who hired James. I trusted him. If I had been more careful, if I hadn't worked so late, maybe none of this would have happened. But all I can do now is be there for my daughter and make sure she knows she is safe. I sold the house not long after. The memories of that night at the empty rooms, they were too much to bear. Alina and I moved to a new town, far away from where it all happened. Every night I check her room twice, sometimes 3 times, just to make sure she is still there. The babysitter, he's in prison. The woman, she's locked away too. But even knowing that doesn't erase the fear. When my father remarried, I decided to return home for Thanksgiving to meet my new stepmom and her 2 sons. I hadn't spent much time with them before, but I wanted to give them a chance. It was only a 90-minute drive, so I arrived mid-morning. The house looked the same, though my father had offered to sell it and buy something larger to accommodate the new family, but his new wife insisted they keep the house. Later I'd understand why she wanted the space to herself. She had no interest in my sister or me coming home. When I stepped inside, I was met with a cold welcome. My stepmom's smile didn't reach her eyes. "What can I do to help?" I asked her, trying to sound cheerful. "I don't need any help," she replied curtly. I spent the morning awkwardly watching TV and attempting small talk with her 2 sons. The younger one, only 13, seemed nice enough, but the older one, 18, had a sharpness to him that made me uneasy. He stared too long, smirking at odd moments, as though he knew something I didn't. Around noon, my stepmom called her eldest to carve the turkey, but my dad stepped in, saying he'd handle it. He began cutting into the turkey and then frowned. "It's not done." My stepmom's face darkened. "This oven must be broken," she snapped. My dad shrugged and put the turkey back in. The air felt thick with tension as we waited. The meal that followed was bizarre. The food was poorly prepared: half-cooked turkey, dry dumplings, and sides that were barely edible. My stepmom sat at the head of the table watching us eat with an expression I couldn't place. When I asked about dessert, she gave a sharp laugh. "We don't need it," she said coldly. As I left that day, her parting words stayed with me. "Next time, call before you come." Months passed, and my father grew distant. Calls with him were short and strange, his voice weak and unsure. When my sister called concerned about his health, I decided to visit again. When I arrived, the house felt darker somehow, the atmosphere heavier. My stepmom answered the door, her smile even more forced than before. "Dad's not feeling well," she said, blocking the door. "I'd like to see him," I insisted. She hesitated, then stepped aside. I found my father in the living room, slumped in his chair. His skin was pale and he looked thinner than I'd ever seen him. "Dad, what's going on?" I asked as sitting beside him. "Just tired," he murmured. "Have you been to the doctor?" "He doesn't need that," my stepmom cut in sharply from the doorway. "I'm taking care of him." Her tone sent a chill through me. Determined to help, I offered to make tea and went into the kitchen. As I searched for the tea bags, something caught my eye on the counter of a dark glass bottle with a handwritten label. The label read, "Restorative Syrup." Curious, I picked it up. The liquid inside was thick and smelled bitter, almost chemical. "What's this?" I asked aloud, turning to see my mom standing in the doorway. Her expression shifted instantly. Her smile vanished and her eyes narrowed. "That's for your father," she said quickly, stepping forward to take the bottle from me. "It's to help him recover." Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled as she grabbed the bottle. I felt a wave of unease. "What's in it?" I pressed. Her face hardened. "Vitamins. It's none of your business." But it didn't look like anything natural. That night I couldn't sleep. The image of that bottle kept flashing in my mind as something about it didn't sit right with me. Early the next morning, before anyone else was awake, I crept into the kitchen to examine it again. The bottle was gone. Panic rose in my chest. I searched the cabinets until I found it tucked away behind a row of cereal boxes. This time I unscrewed the cap and dipped a spoon into the syrup. It was bitter and burned slightly on my tongue, leaving an acrid aftertaste. My gut told me to trust my instincts. I took a photo of the label with my phone and tucked the bottle back where I found it. Later that morning, I confronted my dad. "Dad, what is that syrup she's been giving you?" His face clouded with confusion. "She says it's for my health," he said weakly. "But do you feel better?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "I feel worse." I didn't get the chance to say more if my stepmom appeared in the doorway, her face dark with suspicion. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice sharp. I stood up. "Dad needs to see a doctor." Her expression turned icy. "I've been taking care of him just fine." "No, you haven't," I snapped, my fear outweighing my caution. "Something's wrong and I'm not leaving until he gets help." For a moment I thought she might lash out, but instead she smiled, a slow, cold smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "Suit yourself," she said quietly, then left the room. That night I stayed by my father's side, refusing to leave him alone. The next morning, I took him to a doctor. What we discovered made my blood run cold. The restorative syrup was analyzed and found to contain substances harmful to his health, ingredients that could slowly poison him over time. When I confronted my stepmom with the evidence, her mask of sweetness crumbled. She screamed at me, calling me ungrateful and accusing me of trying to ruin her life. I didn't care. My only concern was getting my father away from her. With my sister's help, we moved my dad out of the house. It wasn't easy. My stepmom fought us every step of the way, but in the end, we succeeded. My father began to recover slowly, both physically and emotionally. He never spoke much about what happened, but I could see the relief in his eyes once he was free of her. As for my stepmom, she disappeared from our lives after the divorce.